I was replacing a busted sprinkler head in the side yard when my daughter-in-law walked past the window, looked right at me through the glass, and didn't say a word. Not good morning. Not a nod. Nothing. Just that flat, assessing look she'd been giving me for 2 years, the kind that made me feel like a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep or throw out. I told myself I was imagining things. My son was happy. That was what mattered. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a landscaping business from a single truck and a push mower into something that employed 40 people at its peak. I know how to read land, where water runs, where roots go, where things rot underground before you ever see it on the surface. My ex-wife used to say I understood dirt better than I understood people. She wasn't entirely wrong, but I understand people well enough to know when something is off. Her name was Lynette, my son. I'll call him my boy, because that's how I still think of him even now that he's 31, had brought her home 18 months before the wedding. She was polished in the way that takes effort to look effortless. Always the right thing to say to anyone who mattered. Always a reason she couldn't quite connect with anyone who didn't. She called me Sir the first 3 times we met, then switched to my first name without asking, then eventually stopped using any name at all when she talked to me, which is its own kind of tell. My boy was in love. I could see it. The way he watched her when she talked, the way he laughed a half second after she did. He'd been lonely for a long time after his mother and I split. He was 14 when we separated, 17 when the divorce was final, and I think some part of him had been looking for something solid to hold on to ever since. I understood that. I didn't want to be the thing that got in the way of it, so I kept my mouth shut. I watched. I told myself I was being protective in the way fathers are always convinced they're being rational, when really they're just being fathers. Then one Saturday in October, about 6 months before the wedding date they'd set, my boy called me and asked if I wanted to grab lunch, just the 2 of us. We did that most months. A diner or a sandwich place, nothing fancy. He'd grown up watching me eat out of a cooler in the truck, so we both had simple tastes. We were halfway through our food when he got a call and stepped outside for a few minutes. His phone was face up on the table when a message came through. I wasn't trying to read it, but the preview was right there, and the name at the top of the message wasn't one I recognized. The message said, "She doesn't suspect anything." Lunch went fine. Keep the timeline. He came back to the table. I didn't say anything. I looked at my coffee. My boy talked about a project at work, some software rollout, and I listened and I nodded, and I drove home afterward thinking I had misread it. A work thing. A surprise. Something innocent. But the word timeline sat in my chest like a stone. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I'm methodical. There's a difference. A suspicious man looks for reasons to distrust. A methodical man follows what he can verify before he draws a conclusion. So instead of calling my son and asking him about a text message I wasn't supposed to see, I did something I'm not proud of, and something I'd do again in a heartbeat. I started paying attention. I remembered the name from the message preview. I won't say it here, but it wasn't hard to find. A couple of searches, a LinkedIn profile, a business address over in the next county. He worked in real estate. Commercial property. His photo showed a man in his early 40s, good-looking in an obvious way. I found out later, much later, that Lynette had known him for 4 years before she ever met my son. What I found first was smaller. Inconsistencies. A weekend trip she'd said was a bachelorette thing for a friend, except when I mentioned it casually to my boy's best friend at a cookout. He'd never heard of the friend. A restaurant charge on a joint card my boy had mentioned offhandedly, in a town neither of them had said they'd been to. Small things. The kind of things that look like nothing until you have enough of them. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've thought about it a lot, and I believe I was right to do it, even though it felt wrong in the way that necessary things sometimes do. I hired someone, a private investigator. A woman who worked out of an office above a tax preparation place on a quiet street downtown. I told her what I knew and what I suspected, and she told me what it would cost. I wrote the check and I drove home and I sat in my kitchen for a long time before I felt anything other than tired. She came back to me 5 weeks later with documentation. Photographs. Records of a hotel room booked twice in the previous 2 months under a name that tracked back to the man from the message. Phone records. The kind you can pull with the right access, showing contact that was frequent and consistent and not the kind you have with someone who's just a colleague. Lynette was having an affair, had been, as far as the investigator could determine, for at least the last 8 months. Possibly the entire relationship with my son. I sat with that for 3 days before I did anything else. I thought about going straight to my boy. I thought about what he would do. And what I know about my son is that he is loyal to the point of blindness with people he loves. He would have gone to her. She would have denied it, cried, explained it away, and he would have believed her, and then I would have lost him. I've seen it happen. I didn't want to be right at the cost of losing my child. So I waited. I'm good at waiting. You learn patience in landscaping. You plant something and you don't see results for months, sometimes years. You do the right things in the right order and you trust the process. I met with an attorney, not to start any legal action, just to understand what I was dealing with. She was a family law specialist, sharp and practical, and she explained some things to me that I hadn't known. In my state, certain communications, recorded with the consent of at least one party to the conversation, are admissible. She suggested I think carefully about what I did next and document everything. I thought carefully. I documented everything. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late March, a venue out in the hill country, a converted ranch property with white-painted fences and a view of the creek. My son had been excited about it for months. He'd asked me to give a toast. I'd been working on it, off and on, in a notebook I kept by the bed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I drove to a hotel where the investigator had told me Lynette had a reservation. I didn't go inside. I sat in the parking lot in my truck and I waited. And after about 40 minutes, I saw her walk in with the man from the messages. They didn't look around. They weren't hiding from anyone. They expected to be there. I am 63 years old, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. Watching that, I realized the heartbreak I'd felt in my own life was mine to carry. This was my son's heartbreak that he didn't even know was coming. That's a different kind of weight. I went home. I called the investigator. I asked her what it would take to get audio. She told me again what was and wasn't legal. I told her I understood. We talked through it carefully. What happened next, I would just say this way. Lynette liked to talk when she felt safe, and there was a place she felt safe that I found out about from a conversation with a mutual acquaintance of hers and her mother's. A detail dropped without any idea of what I would do with it. I'm not going to give more specifics than that. I will say that what I obtained was legal and that the attorney reviewed it and told me it would hold. The recording was 22 minutes long. In it, Lynette talked about the inheritance. My business, the landscaping company I'd built, was worth something. I'd also inherited a piece of commercial property from my own father, free and clear. My boy stood to receive a significant amount when I was gone, or if I chose to transfer any assets before that. Lynette discussed the timeline of the marriage, how long she expected it to take before certain things were accessible, what her plan was with the man I now knew was her actual partner. She used the word investment twice. She used my son's name once, without any warmth at all. I didn't play the recording to anyone before the wedding. I know people will wonder about that. The answer is complicated. Part of it was that I still wasn't certain my son would believe me without witnessing something himself. Part of it was that the attorney advised me to wait, to have everything compiled and reviewed before I acted. And part of it, the part I'm least comfortable admitting, is that I wanted to give Lynette a chance to be wrong, to give my own ears a chance to have misheard. I kept hoping for a different explanation. There was no different explanation. The morning of the wedding, I put on the suit I'd bought for the occasion, and I drove to the venue, and I helped my son with his cufflinks in a small room off the main hall. He was nervous and happy in the way young men are on days they've been looking forward to, and I looked at him and I thought about every version of this moment I'd imagined for him since he was small. A good one, a real one, with someone who actually saw him. I held it together. I hugged him. I told him I loved him and that I was proud of him. I meant all of it. Then Lynette's mother found me before the ceremony and told me to find a seat in the back. I said I was the groom's father. She said Lynette had decided it would be better if I weren't in the front row. I went to speak to Lynette directly. I found her in the bridal suite. There were several women in the room and she looked at me with no expression and said, clearly enough for people to hear, that I wasn't welcome here, that I should leave, that if I wanted any kind of relationship with my son going forward, I needed to understand my place. Her exact words were, if you can't respect this day, you can get out. We don't need you here. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about 22 minutes of audio on a device in the breast pocket of my suit jacket. I thought about the attorney's card in my wallet. I thought about my son down the hall who still thought this was the best day of his life. I said, all right. I walked back down the hallway. I knocked on the room where my son was waiting. I told him there was something I needed him to hear before he walked out that door. He looked at me, confused, a little impatient, and I told him I would not ask twice. That whatever he decided after this was his to decide. That I loved him, that I was sorry. I played him the first 4 minutes of the recording. 4 minutes was enough. What happened after that is something I'll keep between my son and me. It wasn't quiet and it wasn't easy. There was no clean cinematic moment where everything resolved itself. My boy is a person who had planned a life around someone and found out that life was built on a fiction, and the way that comes apart is not pretty and not fast and not something a father can fix by being right. The wedding did not happen. Lynette and her family left. Some of the guests, the ones on her side who had driven in from out of state, left without knowing what had happened. My son's friends, the ones who'd known him for years, stayed. A few of them ended up sitting with us on the porch of the venue while the catering staff quietly started breaking down the setup inside. Someone found a bottle of good whiskey. The sun went down over the creek and nobody said very much for a long time. My son asked me at some point in that long evening how long I'd known. I told him the truth. All of it. The text I'd seen by accident. The investigator. The recording. The attorney. The waiting. He didn't speak for a while after that. Then he said he wished I'd told him sooner. I said I understood. He said, "Did you think I wouldn't believe you?" And I told him yes. That was exactly what I'd thought. He looked at the creek for a while. Then he said, "You were probably right. That's my son. He's honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable." I don't know where he got that from. Maybe both of us, pieces of it. His mother was always honest. I like to think I am too, though I'm slower about it. He moved back into his old apartment. The woman was already gone from it. She'd moved into my son's place months ago. He had to go through the whole business of untangling shared finances, a lease, small possessions that had accumulated the way they do. It took time. He was not fine for a while. I didn't pretend he was. What I did was show up. I drove over on weekends. We worked on things around his place. He'd let a few projects go while he was planning the wedding. I didn't push him to talk. We ate lunch at the same diner. We watched games. We let time do what time do. Watch games. About 4 months after that day at the venue, he called me on a Tuesday evening and said he wanted me to know something. He'd started seeing someone new. Nothing serious yet. But she'd asked him to tell her about his family, and he'd talked about me for 20 minutes without realizing it. He said, "I think that's probably a good sign." I think so too. I've had a lot of time to think about what I could have done differently. Whether I waited too long, whether I should have been more direct earlier, whether there was some version of this where my son didn't have to go through what he went through. I don't know, I go back and forth on it. What I keep coming back to is that I had one chance to get it right. One moment where showing him the truth would actually land, and I had to wait until that moment came. I might have been wrong about that. But he's still here and we're still us, and that's what I have. I changed my will a few months after the wedding that never happened. Not to protect anything from Lynette, she was long gone. But because the process of watching someone try to take what I'd built made me think harder about what I actually wanted to do with it. I set up a proper trust. I talked to my son about it openly, which we'd never done before. It was awkward, and then it wasn't, and now he knows exactly where things stand, and so do I. The sprinkler head I was working on that morning, the day I first noticed the look on Lynette's face through the window, and never actually finished fixing it. It's still a little off. Water's too far to the left, misses a strip of grass about 8 inches wide. I keep meaning to get back to it. I will eventually. There's no rush.